In a quiet village nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, there lived a girl named Tala. She was known for her gentle demeanor and kind heart, traits that had endeared her to many in the community. However, her life was overshadowed by the presence of her stepmother, a woman whose bitterness and vanity were as evident as the sun in the sky. Tala's mother had passed away when she was just a child, leaving her father devastated. In his grief, he remarried, hoping to bring some semblance of normalcy back into their lives. But the woman he chose was far from the nurturing figure Tala needed. From the moment she stepped into their home, the stepmother made it clear that Tala was an unwelcome reminder of the past. The stepmother's days were consumed with maintaining her appearance and social standing. She would spend hours in front of the mirror, applying layers of makeup and adorning herself in the finest garments. In contrast, she forced Tala to wear her old, cast-off clothes, garments that were faded and ill-fitting. "These suit you better," she would sneer, "a reflection of your worth." Tala bore these indignities with quiet resilience. She would rise before dawn, tending to the household chores with meticulous care. Her hands, though calloused from labor, moved with grace as she swept the floors, prepared meals, and tended to the garden. Despite the constant belittlement, she never uttered a word of complaint. The villagers watched this dynamic unfold with a mix of pity and apprehension. They admired Tala's fortitude but were wary of intervening. The stepmother held a certain sway in the community, her sharp tongue and manipulative nature making her a formidable presence. Whispers of her cruelty circulated, but no one dared to confront her directly. Children in the village would often approach Tala, drawn by her warmth and gentle spirit. She would share stories with them, tales filled with wonder and moral lessons. Her voice, soft and melodic, would captivate her young audience, providing them with a brief escape from their own realities. These moments were a solace for Tala, a reminder that kindness could still flourish amidst adversity. One day, as Tala was gathering herbs in the forest, she encountered an elderly woman struggling to carry a bundle of firewood. Without hesitation, Tala offered her assistance, helping the woman carry the load back to her cottage. Grateful, the woman offered Tala a simple pendant, saying, "This is a token of gratitude. May it bring you comfort in times of need." Tala accepted the gift with humility, unaware of its significance. Upon returning home, the stepmother noticed the pendant and demanded to know where it came from. When Tala explained, the stepmother's eyes narrowed. "You think a trinket from a forest hag makes you special?" she spat, snatching the pendant and tossing it into the fire. Tala watched silently as the flames consumed the gift, her heart heavy with sorrow. As time passed, the stepmother's disdain for Tala grew more pronounced. She would invent reasons to punish her, accusing her of imagined slights and failures. Meals became scarce, and Tala often went to bed hungry. Despite this, she continued to perform her duties diligently, finding solace in the small joys of nature and the fleeting moments of kindness from the villagers. One evening, a traveling merchant arrived in the village, bringing with him exotic goods and tales from distant lands. Among his wares was a beautiful fabric, shimmering with hues that seemed to change with the light. The villagers gathered around, marveling at the cloth's beauty. The stepmother, ever eager to assert her status, purchased the fabric, declaring she would have a dress made that would be the envy of all. She entrusted the fabric to Tala, instructing her to sew the dress. "Do not ruin this, or you'll regret it," she warned. Tala worked tirelessly, her fingers deftly stitching the garment with precision and care. As she worked, she couldn't help but admire the fabric's beauty, its colors reminding her of the forest's ever-changing hues. When the dress was complete, the stepmother tried it on, preening before the mirror. But as she admired herself, the fabric began to change. The vibrant colors dulled, turning a murky gray. The villagers, who had gathered to see the dress, gasped in shock. "What trickery is this?" the stepmother shrieked, tearing the dress off and throwing it at Tala. "You've cursed it." Tala, bewildered, examined the dress. As she held it, the colors returned, vibrant and mesmerizing. The villagers murmured among themselves, some suggesting that the fabric responded to the wearer's heart. Embarrassed and enraged, the stepmother stormed off, leaving Tala standing amidst the crowd, the dress glowing in her hands. From that day, the villagers began to see Tala in a new light. They recognized her inner strength and the purity of her spirit. While the stepmother's influence waned, Tala's presence grew more cherished. She continued to live with grace and humility, her quiet resilience serving as an inspiration to all. And so, in the shadows cast by her stepmother's bitterness, Tala's light shone ever brighter, illuminating the path for others to follow. Tala's days had grown quieter in the weeks leading up to the argument, though not from peace. Her voice, once warm and gentle even in the most difficult moments, had turned to a whisper. The village noticed her drawn face and the way her steps slowed, how she no longer lingered in the garden she loved so much or smiled at the passing children. The light that had lived in her dimmed. It began on a cold morning when frost clung to the windows despite the season. Tala had risen early, as she always did, to prepare food for her stepmother. But this morning, her hands trembled as she chopped the herbs, and she burned the porridge, something she had never done before. When the stepmother came down and saw the spoiled meal, she sneered. "You're growing careless, girl. You sleep too much, walk too slow, and now you ruin food. Perhaps you are finally becoming like your mother, soft and weak." Tala, for the first time in her life, did not stay silent. She was not weak, Tala said quietly. She had more strength in her silence than you have in your words. The silence that followed was colder than the frost outside. The stepmother's eyes darkened, and her hands clenched. She stepped forward and slapped Tala hard across the face. Tala staggered but did not fall. Her cheek stung, but it was nothing compared to the rush of heat in her chest, the feeling of years of cruelty cracking apart. But then, as suddenly as the anger had flared, she turned pale. Her knees buckled. And this time, she did fall. From that moment on, she could not keep food down. She grew dizzy often and collapsed twice more that week. Her eyes seemed to sink into her face, and her breath rasped in her chest. The village healer came, examined her, and said nothing could be done. "It is like something unseen has gripped her heart," the old woman whispered to the neighbors. The stepmother declared it was grief, laziness, or some curse of her own making. She refused to pay for stronger medicine and locked Tala in her room at night, claiming she needed rest. 3 days after the argument, Tala stopped speaking altogether. For days after the argument, she stopped moving. She died that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills. The village was stunned. Many came to the house in disbelief, standing outside to murmur prayers or drop flowers beneath the windows. A few dared to accuse the stepmother of neglect, but she shooed them away with a bitter face and sharp tongue. She was never strong, the stepmother told the mourners. She carried weakness in her bones. "I did everything I could." And then, she did something even more unexpected. She demanded Tala be buried in the old silk dress, the one she herself used to wear in her youth, the one she once flaunted in front of mirrors. She loved it, the stepmother claimed, voice syrupy with false grief. She always admired it. It should go with her. Some were uneasy. Others too stunned to protest. The dress was wrapped around Tala's frail frame, her still form too fragile for something so elaborate. The fabric clung unnaturally, its shimmer dulled. Her hair was combed back, her lips pale, but strangely peaceful. On the day of the funeral, clouds gathered low over the hills. Rain threatened but never came. The ground at the graveyard was soft, yet as the villagers tried to dig the grave, the soil gave resistance. The gravediggers wiped their brows, confused. Birds began to circle above, not scavengers, but black river birds that never flew so high, especially not in groups. Their cries were sharp and echoed over the field. The funeral continued in uneasy silence. The coffin was lowered into the ground, and as the final shovelful of dirt landed, the earth seemed to breathe. A subtle shifting, as if the ground did not accept what it had been given. One of the village children gasped and pointed, claiming the dirt moved, that something was pushing from beneath. But his mother hushed him quickly, brushing the boy's hair back and whispering to be respectful. The wind picked up just as the grave was sealed. It howled once, sharply, then fell dead still. No leaves rustled, no birds sang. The only sound was the uneasy shuffling of feet as the villagers began to leave, their eyes flickering toward the grave as if expecting it to call them back. As the last person turned away, the wind whispered again. That night, back in the house, the stepmother poured herself wine and sat in front of her mirror. She looked younger than she had in years, or so she thought. The silver dress that now lay buried had once been her pride. Its absence stung, though she would never admit it aloud. Still, she told herself she had done what was best. She had sent the girl away with dignity. The dress had always made people look. Now they would remember the funeral as beautiful, elegant, even poetic. She drank until the moon was high and the wind outside began to cry. And even then, when the branches scratched her windows, she muttered, "It's just a storm. Just a storm." But the storm never came. Only the wind remained. In the village, the people whispered again. Many said they had never seen a burial like it, never felt a sky so heavy, never seen birds act so strange. A few muttered about omens. Others prayed. And the oldest woman in the village, the one who had given Tala the pendant long ago, sat alone by her fire and murmured to herself. "The ground didn't settle," she said softly. "The earth knows lies when it tastes them." The next morning, strange things began to happen. Dew pooled where there was no grass. The garden Tala once tended sprouted a single white flower, even though the soil had been left untouched. Birds gathered near her window, then vanished again without sound. The candle in the village temple flickered out on its own and would not relight until dusk. Still, the stepmother denied everything. "She is gone," she said, to no one in particular. "And she is not coming back." But she was wrong. Because something had shifted. Something deep and unseen. The earth had not settled for a reason. The dress that lay buried had once belonged to a woman who wore lies like jewelry. But the body wrapped in it carried truth. And that truth, smothered in silk and buried too soon, would not remain quiet for long. Beneath the soil, where roots curled around wood and secrets slept, something stirred. And somewhere between death and return, Tala opened her eyes. Of all the villagers who mourned Tala's death, Yara felt it most deeply. They had been close, like sisters born from different mothers, united in laughter, shared secrets, and childhood games under the shade of the tamarind trees. Since Tala's burial, Yara could not sleep without waking in the grip of cold sweat, a chill lingering in her room even with her windows shut tight. The first dream came just 3 nights after the funeral. Yara stood at the edge of a forest cloaked in dense mist, a place she didn't recognize, though it felt eerily familiar. There, in the thick of the dream, a figure walked slowly between the trees. It was Tala. But she was not wearing the silver-red gown in which she had been buried. She wore a flowing white robe that shimmered with light, like it had been spun from river moonlight. Her face was calm, distant, but her eyes were not the same. They held sorrow, but not weakness. They held knowledge. Power. Tala did not speak. She only walked, barefoot and unhurried, vanishing deeper into the trees. But just before disappearing, she turned her head, not all the way, just enough to let Yara see her lips move. The words were too soft to hear, but the forest seemed to echo with whispers the moment she was gone. Yara woke with her pillow damp from tears she didn't remember shedding. That morning, the birds outside her window were silent. She didn't speak of the dream. Not yet. Not until others began to tell her their own. An old woman who had once given Tala bread during a storm came to the village square, trembling, her hands clutched to her chest. "I saw her," she whispered. "Walking in the mist. Wearing white. Not the dress she wore to the grave. She smiled at me, but I couldn't move." A child, barely 5, told her mother he had seen the nice girl with the soft voice near the trees behind their house. "She was glowing," he said simply, as children do, unburdened by fear they cannot name. She said not to worry. At first, Yara believed these were just the echoes of grief, people projecting the guilt they didn't know they carried. But one morning, a whisper drew her attention before she even left her bed. Her name. Faint, but clear. Yara. She jolted up. The room was still. The morning sun poured in warm and golden. Nothing moved, yet the whisper still hung in the corners of her hearing. Like a thread tied to something deeper. She left her home in silence, drawn to the edge of the village without knowing why. The forest stood ahead, its branches tangled like reaching arms. The wind stirred softly through the trees, and Yara paused just short of entering. There, caught between bark and root, was the faintest hint of white, like a scrap of linen. She reached out, fingers trembling, and touched it. It crumbled at her touch. But when she looked to the ground, she found no trace of it. Later that evening, Yara gathered the courage to approach the stepmother's house, where a heavy silence had fallen since Tala's burial. The house seemed darker than usual, like the sun had forgotten to touch it. No flowers grew nearby anymore. Even the wind passed it by in silence. She knocked once. No answer. Twice. And then she noticed something lying neatly on the step. A bundle of folded fabric. Yara knelt, her chest suddenly tight. The fabric was unmistakable. The red and silver burial gown, pristine. Clean. Pressed as if it had never touched dirt. No trace of grave soil, no sign of wear. And yet this was the very dress Tala had been buried in. Yara remembered the way it clung to her frame, the unnatural stillness of it in the coffin. She reached out, touched the cloth. It was cold. Too cold for something left outside. She looked around, heart pounding. No one was in sight. She took the dress and backed away slowly, the weight of it unnatural in her arms. She didn't know whether to scream or pray. That night, half the village dreamed again. Tala walked once more, this time slower, more deliberate. Each step she took in their dreams made the ground pulse. Leaves withered, then turned green again. Her white robe now trailed behind her like a river. She's changing, someone whispered at the village well the next day. She's not who she was before. Yara tried to return the dress to the grave, unsure if it belonged to the living or the dead. But when she arrived at the burial site with the bundle in her arms, the earth looked untouched. Not even a single mound where the grave had been. No marker. No flowers. No hollow in the ground. As though Tala had never been buried at all. Her hands shook as she laid the dress on the ground, hoping for a sign. None came. But when she turned to leave, she saw movement in the trees. A flicker of white. And then it was gone. She couldn't sleep that night. The dreams came again, this time louder. The whispers no longer whispered. Tala walks, they said. She remembers. She wears her truth now. By the next sunrise, half the village refused to speak Tala's name aloud. Children were kept indoors. The priest lit incense and spoke of lost spirits. But Yara waited. She stood at the edge of the forest where the dreams always began. Her eyes closed, her hands open. And there, just past the mist, she heard the footsteps. Soft. Real. And then the whisper again. You saw me as I was. Now see me as I am. Yara opened her eyes, and for a moment, just a heartbeat, she saw her friend step from the trees. Not a ghost. Not a memory. Alive. Changed. And wearing white. Of all the people in the village, only one pretended nothing had changed, Tala's stepmother. In the days following the strange return of the burial gown and the whispers of Tala walking in dreams, she kept her windows closed and her lips tighter. She swept her porch with harsh strokes, glared at villagers who whispered too loud, and forced a smile that barely reached the edge of her jaw. But behind her doors, inside the house Tala had once lived in, something had shifted, and she felt it. It began with the mirrors. At first, she caught only flickers, movements that didn't match her own. She would brush her hair in the small cracked mirror by her bed and see someone behind her. Not clearly. Just the shape of a girl's shoulder. A glimpse of white. When she turned, there was no one. But when she turned back to the mirror, her reflection would blink too slowly, or not at all. She told herself it was nothing. Just her nerves. Just bad sleep. But the nights made the silence louder. Doors creaked without breeze. The kettle whistled without fire. And once, just once, as she passed Tala's old room, she heard soft breathing, slow and steady, as though someone slept inside. She refused to look. She began locking her bedroom door at night. She tucked her old dresses into a wooden trunk, fastening it shut with a rope and a prayer. She avoided mirrors. She salted her windowsills. And still, the house breathed with something not hers. One evening, she went to fetch water from the back of the house and stopped dead at the threshold. A crimson shawl, her favorite, the one she had worn to the village festival the year before, hung from the doorframe. But she had stored that shawl away months ago. She stepped back, uneasy, then reached to touch it. It vanished. Not fell. Not fluttered. Vanished. She gasped, but no one was there to hear her. She ran back inside and bolted the door. That night, the firewood would not catch. She struck the flint again and again. The sparks leapt, but the wood remained cold. She tried oil. She tried paper. Nothing burned. It was as though the flame refused to live in her house. She wrapped herself in blankets, but her skin felt raw with cold. From the corner of her room, a soft creak echoed, like footsteps on old floorboards. She froze. The sound moved. One slow step. Then another. Then silence. She waited for morning with her eyes open and her throat dry. The next day, she went to the village healer, not for help, but for something stronger. Charms. Salt. Ash from the sacred fig tree. The healer raised a brow, asked no questions, and handed her a small pouch wrapped in black cloth. "Burn this at your doorstep," the healer said. "Say her name." The stepmother flinched. "I don't speak of the dead." "Then the dead will keep speaking of you," the healer replied, and turned away. She didn't burn the pouch. She placed it under her bed and told herself it was enough. But the next morning, she found every dress she had left in the trunk folded neatly across her bed. Dresses she had locked away. Dresses Tala had once been forced to wear. Now they sat on the mattress as if prepared for something. Or someone. She screamed. The neighbors heard but didn't come. She tried to burn them. Piled them in the yard, doused them with lamp oil, struck the match. The flame flickered, then died. Not even the oil would catch. She fell to her knees, hands trembling, the smell of wet fabric rising into her nose like rot. From the trees, someone laughed. A soft, familiar giggle, the kind Tala used to make when she teased goats with blades of grass. It came and went on the wind. She clutched her ears, but the sound burrowed into her. That night, the dreams returned. She was in the forest. Not walking, but running. Barefoot, stumbling through roots and vines. Behind her, a white figure walked slowly, steadily, her eyes glowing with sorrow. "Why did you bury me in your shame?" Tala asked. The stepmother turned to flee, but the forest closed around her. She tripped, fell, and when she looked up, Tala stood above her. "I wore your lies," Tala said softly, touching the red gown that no longer belonged to her. "Now you will wear the truth." The stepmother woke screaming, tangled in her bed sheets. The next morning, she found her reflection gone. The mirror was still there, unbroken, but it reflected only the room, not her. She waved her hand in front of it. Nothing. Her form didn't exist in glass anymore. She covered every mirror in the house with cloth. But the glass of the water basin caught her face anyway, distorted and distant. She stopped eating. Her hair began to gray in streaks. Her skin lost its warmth. She saw Tala in every corner. In the folds of curtains. In the shadow of the cupboard. In the steam of her untouched tea. She begged the priest for cleansing. He came with incense, muttering prayers, But when he lit the incense, the smoke turned black and drifted toward Tala's room. The priest left without finishing. He muttered something about wronged spirits and divine balance. Desperate, the stepmother took the burial gown, the one that had returned untouched, and tried to tear it. The fabric would not rip. It was like slicing water. She tried soaking it in oil again and lighting it. The fire sparked, but then turned blue and hissed, as if something inside the dress refused to be consumed. She collapsed in her doorway, face in her hands. Outside, the villagers passed without looking. No one dared approach the house now. That night, she locked every door, every window. She dragged a chair to brace her bedroom door. But at midnight, the door creaked open anyway. She gasped and turned, heart hammering, but saw no one. Only the sound of a dress dragging across the wooden floor. She lit her lamp. The flame caught, but the room dimmed instead of brightened. And in the corner stood a girl in white, eyes deep as rain-soaked soil. Not angry. Just watching. She whispered, "You should have let me rest in peace." The light flickered. And the stepmother fainted where she stood. From that night on, the house grew colder. The wind inside didn't match the wind outside. Her clothes never stayed where she left them. And always, in her sleep, she saw the white robe dancing just beyond reach. Tala never spoke again. She only watched. And the stepmother, once proud, once cruel, now muttered apologies to corners and shadows, growing thinner by the day. Everyone in the village knew what was happening. No one intervened. For justice, sometimes, wears the face of the one who was wronged. And sometimes, she comes back wearing something else. The night air was still in the way that made the skin tighten and the heart feel watched. Not a leaf rustled, not a bird called. Even the restless dogs of the village, known for howling at passing spirits, were silent that night. It was the 7th night since Tala's burial. The villagers, though they did not admit it aloud, had been counting. In the depth of that stillness, just past midnight, a strange wind swept through the village. It did not move the trees or rattle windows, it moved through people. Old men paused mid-snore. Children stirred and whimpered in sleep. Mothers reached instinctively for the lamps beside their beds. Something in the wind whispered of return. And then came the sound of bare feet on earth. Soft. Measured. Sure. Not from the road, but from the forest edge, where moonlight barely touched the soil. A figure stepped out from the trees, as silent as a dream but more solid than waking. Tala. But not Tala as they remembered her. Her skin, once the soft bronze of sunlit afternoons, now carried a pale shimmer, as if it had been brushed with dust from the moon. Her hair hung loose and dark around her shoulders, but it was the cloak that stilled the breath of anyone watching. A long, flowing mantle stitched from ash, leaf, and night itself. It did not belong to this world. Leaves, brittle yet unburnt, shimmered with charcoal veins. Ash wove through them like fine thread. The cloak moved, not with the wind, but with its own purpose, dragging behind her in utter silence. Her feet, bare and clean, touched the ground like she had never been beneath it. No soil clung to her. No bruise marked her skin. The earth yielded as she walked. No one saw her come from the grave. But everyone knew. She walked down the village path, passing homes that had watched her grow up and heard her cry. Now, they offered only silence. People peered through shutters. Curtains were pulled back, then quickly closed. A few brave ones stood behind doorframes, holding their breath. But no one dared speak her name. She did not look at them. Her eyes remained forward, focused on a path no one else could see. And yet, her very presence demanded attention. Lanterns dimmed as she passed. Chickens huddled into corners of their coops. Dogs crawled under porches. Even the owls that haunted the village trees tucked in their wings and waited. At one point, a child stirred in her sleep and began to cry. The mother, panicked, rushed to hush her, but the sound echoed just enough to reach Tala's ears. She paused. The entire village seemed to hold its breath. Slowly, she turned her head. The cloak rustled slightly, like leaves swept in a breathless storm. Her eyes found the house, not the child, not the mother, but the wooden door that had once been kind to her. She stared, her expression unreadable, not human yet not monstrous. Then she turned back to her path. Her destination was never in question. Tala walked to the center of the village, the place where her mother had once sung during festivals, where she had once danced in borrowed shoes. The square stood empty now. Even the sky had hidden its stars. The moon glowed full and pale, casting silver over the stone. And there, at the edge of the square, her stepmother's house. Windows shut. Door bolted. But Tala didn't need keys. She stepped forward. With one breath, the door creaked open, not violently, not loudly, but as though it had simply grown tired of keeping secrets. From inside, a gasp. The villagers who dared peek from a distance saw her cross the threshold. The stepmother's scream echoed only once, then was swallowed by silence. No one knew what was said inside that house. No one ever found the courage to ask. But hours passed. No one moved. And when the first hints of dawn touched the edges of the sky, Tala stepped out. Alone. Her cloak of ash and leaves was untouched. But now, something glimmered beneath it, a necklace made of thorns, wet with dew. Her eyes, once pale with moonlight, now carried a warmth that stung. She walked away from the village, not toward her old home, not toward any house or shelter, but back into the forest. Birds did not chirp. Insects did not buzz. Even the trees seemed to lean away from her. But as she passed the stream at the edge of the woods, a fox emerged from the thickets. It lowered its head in a slow, reverent bow. Behind it, a stag stood in quiet stillness, watching. The animals knew. Something old had returned. And though she spoke no words, Tala's silence was louder than any tale the village would tell for generations. They would say she returned wearing something not of this world. They would say she didn't walk, she remembered how the earth had carried her before. They would say she was not dead, nor alive, but something else. And above all, they would say this: do not bury truth in borrowed cloth. It always finds a way back. The cloth merchant arrived at dawn, his donkey cart creaking under bundles of dyed linens and bolts of patterned wax fabric. He was old, with cloudy eyes and fingers stained from years of indigo and ash. Most knew him as Bakwo the Quiet, a man who traveled from coast to savannah, bartering cloth and stories in equal measure. He had not planned to stop in the village, not this time. But something in the wind, something in the very way the air settled heavy against his bones, urged him to pause. When he asked the first woman he saw why the village smelled of morning and silence, she only shook her head and pointed toward the forest's edge. They say she walks again, was all the woman could manage. He unpacked his cart in the village square, but few came to browse. Those who did brought more fear than coin, glancing over their shoulders and whispering too much. At first, Bakwo ignored them. But then a child, a boy no older than 7, approached him with wide eyes and a single question. Can cloth return from the dead? Bakwo's fingers froze over a folded Kent pattern. He looked up slowly, reading something in the boy's face, something old, something seen. He didn't answer the child. Instead, he asked for the girl's name. When he heard it, he exhaled with a shiver. Tala. He remembered that name from years before, when he'd sold fabric to her mother, a soft-spoken woman with a gentle laugh and good taste in color. He had never met the girl, but he knew bloodlines, and memory had a way of clinging to fabric. That evening, Bakwo asked to meet the elders. They sat in the shrine house, surrounded by oil lamps and carved masks of ancestral spirits. Their expressions were lined with concern, their voices low, uncertain. The tale spilled out, of Tala's death, her burial in red cloth that did not return with her, the ashen leaf garment she now wore, and the silence that followed in her wake. When they were done, Bakwo leaned forward and said only 2 words, spiritware. The room fell cold. Few in the circle had heard the term. Fewer still had believed it real. Bakwo spoke again, voice low and steady. It is not cloth as we know it. It is not spun. It is not sewn. It cannot be washed nor torn. It does not burn. Spiritware is conjured, woven not with thread, but with truth. It is made only by those who return. The elders exchanged glances, unease tightening around them. Return from where, one asked, though he already knew. From the edge, Bakwo replied. Where the body dies, but the soul refuses to rest. He told them of an old myth, mostly whispered by nomads and riverwalkers. Long ago, it was said, those who died with injustice tangled in their final breath could summon their story into form. The cloth would wrap them, not to shield, but to reveal. Grief, betrayal, rage, even love, it would all show in the weave. Some garments would carry the shape of morning winds, others the color of betrayal's blood. But one thing was always true, no living hand could create or destroy such a garment. One elder, the oldest among them, leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. What does Talas mean? Bakwo looked past them, as if seeing something just outside the hut. Her cloak is made of ashen leaves. Ash for what was burned unjustly. Leaves for life returned. It means she is grief reborn. She is justice unfinished. And the river and forest have claimed her as one of their own. A sharp breath passed through the room. But she has harmed no one, another elder argued. She walks. She watches. She is quiet. For now, Bakwo answered. But spiritware is not worn for silence. It tells of a story not yet done. If the one who returns forgives, the cloth may fall. But if not... His words trailed off. The elders did not finish the thought. Outside, the night deepened. In the homes scattered across the village, people sat with their lamps burning longer than usual. No laughter carried through the air. No lullabies rocked children to sleep. And far in the distance, where the trees bent inward and the wind carried secrets, a shape moved slowly beneath the stars. Tala's cloak shimmered under moonlight, part dust, part memory. She did not speak. She did not need to. The villagers had started leaving small offerings outside their doors, fabric scraps, white candles, bowls of water and honey. Some hoped to appease her. Others simply feared the truth she might yet reveal. In time, Bakwo packed his cart again, but before he left, he tied a single piece of unmarked cloth to the shrine house door. It was a gesture of knowing. A gesture of respect. As he walked away, he murmured to no one in particular, when the dead return dressed in their truth, the living must decide which lies to bury next. The stepmother's home, once filled with chatter and clinking ornaments, now echoed with an emptiness no amount of gold or perfume could cover. At first, the villagers were quiet about their suspicions. They lowered their eyes and mumbled greetings when she passed. But as days grew darker and Tala's silent figure began to be seen more often, watching from the edge of fields, standing by the forest path, never speaking, the village grew bold in its avoidance. Children were pulled indoors when the stepmother walked by. Shopkeepers closed their stalls just as she approached. At the well, women whispered behind cupped hands, muttering that her heart was as hollow as her reflection had become. And they were not wrong. The mirrors inside her house stopped showing her face. Sometimes she saw Tala instead, standing behind her, unmoving, wrapped in that ashen leaf cloak that now pulsed with color like breath itself. It had begun to shift in hue. The first time it turned a deep crimson was when the stepmother told the baker she had loved Tala as her own. The very next morning, someone found crimson feathers scattered across her doorway. The color of blood. The color of guilt. That was when the rumors took root, the cloak knew lies. Each time the stepmother opened her mouth in defense, she was sick already. I didn't push her, it was grief that buried her, not me. The garment's color changed, dusky blue, rotten green, storm black. A kaleidoscope of falsehoods. People watched the cloak more than they listened to her. It became a barometer of truth, and in doing so, her own voice lost meaning. She stopped leaving her home. She burned incense and salt at her door. She scrawled old prayers onto scraps of paper and hung them from the windows. But the house remained cold. The firewood would not catch properly, food spoiled faster than it should, and whispers curled into her ears at night like smoke, liar, liar, liar. When she tried to flee, her footsteps betrayed her. The path from her house twisted in ways it never had before. Roads once straight curved unexpectedly, leading her back home. She once found herself walking in circles for hours, only to realize she'd never left the shadow of her own porch. A hunter, brave, or foolish, enough to offer her help, claimed he saw someone walking behind her. But no matter how fast he turned or how long he stared, he couldn't make out a face. Just a moving shape. A girl. Cloaked. Watching. The hunter never returned. By the third week, the stepmother began to unravel. Her vanity cracked like a brittle mask. Her clothes, once embroidered and jeweled, hung loosely from her frame. Her hair, always oiled and perfumed, matted at the roots. She begged anyone who passed near her house for forgiveness, offering bread, gold, even stories, but no one accepted. They feared her. No, they feared her shadow. She began talking aloud, even when alone. Whispering to someone unseen. Apologizing to the empty corners of the room. "I didn't mean for it to go so far," she said to a teacup. "You weren't supposed to die," she muttered to her reflection in the well. But the cloak outside, always outside, lingered. Watching. And when she lied again, claiming she never raised a hand to Tala, the cloak turned a sickly gray. That night, rain fell on her house alone. No other roof in the village was touched. By then, even the animals avoided her. Her cat had vanished. The goat refused to enter the yard. Birds perched on nearby trees but never sang when she was beneath them. The world itself, it seemed, had turned its face away. Some said Tala had become more than spirit, she was now memory made real. A memory that walked. A memory that dressed itself in truth. The stepmother couldn't escape memory. Late one night, a boy walking near the shrine swore he saw the cloak glow softly in silver light. Tala stood facing her stepmother's house, motionless. As the boy watched, the cloak shimmered, first pale yellow, then a piercing blue. Then back to silver. As if the spirit were listening, weighing, remembering. The boy ran. He told no one. But he avoided that path for weeks. The stepmother, once envied and feared, now lived in a house full of echoes and locked doors. Her laughter had become a cracked thing, twisted at the edges. She wrote a confession no one read and buried it under her pillow. Some say she tried to destroy the remaining red garments from Tala's burial. But each time, the fire refused to light. She began to understand what the others had already accepted: her lies were not just words. They were fuel. Each falsehood fed the cloak. Each denial made the spirit stronger. In her final days, she whispered only one thing over and over, sitting in the same room where she once mocked Tala for being too quiet, too soft. She was wearing red when I buried her. Why is she in gray now? Why won't it stay red? No one answered. But if one listened closely, one might hear footsteps just beyond her door. And the rustle of a cloak that never stayed one color for long. The cloak wrapped around Tala was no longer just a garment, it had become a living canvas of truth, whispering secrets too heavy for words. The villagers who glimpsed it shuddered, for the fabric shimmered with strange symbols that flickered like stars caught in a restless sky. These were no ordinary patterns, but flashes of memories that danced and twisted with a haunting beauty and dreadful clarity. At first, the symbols appeared as simple shapes, twisting vines, thorny branches curling in on themselves. But soon, the villagers realized these were not mere decorations. They were stories woven in threads of light and shadow. Some saw the faint outlines of a hand, pale and trembling, slipping something bitter into Tala's tea. Others saw a fleeting glimpse of a shadowy figure lurking near the girl's bed at night, eyes glinting with cold envy. Whispers spread that the cloak was speaking, telling a story no tongue dared utter. It was Tala's voice, silent but impossible to ignore. When Tala moved through the village wearing the cloak, the air grew still. faces turned toward her with a mix of awe and dread. No one dared approach directly, but the elders gathered in hushed circles, peering at the glowing symbols, trying to decipher their meaning. It was as if the cloak itself demanded that justice be seen and felt. The villagers remembered how Tala had been the quiet light among them, gentle, kind, and full of a grace that made her stepmother's bitterness all the more poisonous. Many recalled the way the stepmother's eyes would darken whenever Tala laughed or received a kind word. The envy had been an open wound, but no one had dared speak against her, fearing the power the woman held. But now the cloak spoke in a language all could understand, one of pain, betrayal, and silent suffering. One afternoon, the village healer, an old woman with hands worn from years of tending wounds, approached Tala. The symbols on the cloak shifted, revealing a pattern that looked like a cup and a tiny vial, glimmering red as if stained with blood. The healer's face turned pale. She was poisoned, the healer whispered, voice trembling. Not in a single act, but slowly, like a creeping shadow that stole her breath and will. Tala did not deny it. She didn't need to. The cloak bore witness. More symbols appeared, scenes from the past no one had known. The stepmother standing over Tala's bed in the dead of night, a sly smile curling her lips as she sprinkled crushed herbs into Tala's food. The girl growing weaker, pale as moonlight, unable to speak of the poison that gripped her insides. The villagers felt a cold fury rise in their hearts. How many times had they looked away, deaf to Tala's silent pleas? How often had they dismissed her suffering because of the stepmother's cunning lies? In the village square, the elders called a meeting. People gathered, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and resolve. The cloak symbols shimmered brighter, illuminating the night like a living lantern. Voices rang out, demanding justice, not just for Tala, but for the innocents crushed beneath years of cruelty. The stepmother's house was surrounded, the air thick with accusation and grief. Some villagers swore they saw the cloak ripple like a storm, its colors deepening to a fierce crimson as if fueled by the collective rage. Tala stood at the center, not as a fragile girl, but as a force of reckoning woven from grief and truth. The stepmother emerged, her face pale and her eyes wild. She tried to deny the accusations, but the cloak symbols turned dark, showing the shadow of her lies and the weight of her sins. "Look," a voice cried, "the cloth remembers everything." And the cloth did. It remembered the jealousy that poisoned a daughter's life, the cruel words spoken in whispered corners, and the silent tears that fell unnoticed. From that day, the village vowed to never let such darkness hide in their midst again. Tala's cloak became a sacred relic, a reminder that truth, no matter how deeply buried, could never be destroyed. It was a living testament, a cloth that remembered and spoke when no one else would. And for Tala, the silent girl who returned from death wrapped not in her stepmother's red, but in a cloak of justice and remembrance, the story had finally found its voice. The village square filled quickly with murmurs and anxious whispers as the day of the tribunal arrived. It was unlike any other gathering the small community had seen, an assembly summoned not just to judge a woman, but to confront the dark shadows that had lingered unseen beneath their lives. At the center of it all stood Tala, draped in her cloak that seemed alive with shimmering symbols and shifting colors. The air around her hummed softly, charged with a quiet power that no one dared underestimate. The stepmother appeared pale and defiant, her eyes darting nervously from the crowd to Tala's silent figure. The villagers, once fearful and unsure, now wore faces hardened with resolve. They had seen the truth the cloak bore, the silent story it had told through patterns and memories. Today, that truth would be spoken aloud. The elder chosen to preside over the tribunal raised his hand for silence. "Step forward, woman," he commanded, "and answer for the pain you have caused." The stepmother took a shaky step forward, her voice rising with false confidence as she began to deny the accusations. She claimed Tala's illness was nature's course, a cruel fate no one could have changed. She insisted the cloak was mere fabric, nothing more than an illusion stirred by frightened minds. But as she spoke, the cloak responded. It pulsed and shifted on Tala's shoulders like a living thing, its colors deepening with each lie. The villagers gasped as the patterns writhed, bright symbols darkening, twisting like thorny vines tightening their grip. It was as if the cloak weighed the stepmother's words and found them wanting, growing heavier with every falsehood. "Lies," whispered the villagers, their voices rising like a chorus. "The cloth knows." The stepmother's confident facade began to crumble. Her hands trembled, her breaths came faster. Desperation flickered in her eyes. She tried to silence the murmurs, pleading for mercy, but the cloak had already made its judgment. Slowly, as if moved by an unseen force, the cloak peeled itself away from Tala's shoulders. It floated in the air, glowing softly, then with a sudden, swift motion, it wrapped around the stepmother. The fabric clung tightly, binding her arms and covering her mouth like a spectral shroud. The crowd watched in awe and fear. The stepmother struggled, but the cloak was unyielding, woven from the very essence of truth and justice. No words could escape her bound lips, no lies could pass through the living threads that held her captive. The elder's voice rang out firmly. "By the witness of the cloth and the voice of the village, we declare you guilty of poisoning your stepdaughter and causing her untimely death. For your crimes, you are hereby exiled from our lands." A heavy silence followed the pronouncement, broken only by the faint rustling of the cloak as it shimmered in the fading light. The stepmother's eyes darted around, pleading silently, but the villagers turned their backs, united in their verdict. As she was led away, bound by the cloth that had once spoken Tala's story, the stepmother's presence faded like a dark shadow retreating from the sun. The village exhaled collectively, a burden lifted, a wrong acknowledged and punished. Tala stood quietly, the cloak now resting gently once more on her shoulders, its symbols glowing softly, a testament to truth, justice, and the power of a story finally told. From that day, the villagers spoke often of the trial of threads, a moment when the unseen was brought to light and the voice of the wronged could no longer be silenced. The cloak became a symbol of protection and remembrance, a sacred reminder that even the quietest souls have power, and that justice, woven in the fabric of truth, cannot be undone. The forest seemed to hold its breath the day Tala disappeared. After the trial, with the stepmother gone and the village's burden lifted, Tala walked slowly toward the edge of the trees, her cloak shimmering softly under the fading sun. She looked neither back nor forward, moving with a quiet purpose that felt as old as the earth beneath her feet. No one called after her, no one dared stop her. It was as if the forest itself had claimed her as its own. Days passed, and Tala was nowhere to be found. The villagers searched briefly, but soon accepted the silence that settled over their home like a gentle dusk. They whispered stories, some fearful, some hopeful, of what had become of the girl who had returned from death draped in a cloak of truth. Some said she had become a guardian of wronged souls, a spirit walking the border between worlds. Whenever a burial was marred by hate or injustice, Tala appeared in the shadows, an ethereal presence who watched over those whose stories had been silenced. It was said her cloak fluttered like a banner of justice, glowing faintly with the memories of those she protected. Others told of a weaver deep within the forest, seated at a loom fashioned from twisted branches and silver threads of moonlight. There, Tala wove garments not of cloth, but of truth and remembrance. Each stitch held a fragment of a story once lost, each thread carried the weight of a soul's pain and resilience. These garments were said to be gifted to the dead, wrapping them in honor and cleansing the bitterness left by betrayal or cruelty. But whatever the tale, one thing was certain: Tala never wore the stepmother's cast-off clothes again. The red gown that had once shamed her lay forgotten beneath the soil, while her cloak of ashen leaves, woven from grief and justice, remained a symbol beyond the reach of mortal cruelty. The villagers found comfort in these stories. Children grew up hearing of the weaver of spirits, learning that even in death, truth could be spoken and wrongs could be made right. The forest became a sacred place, a threshold where past and present intertwined, where Tala's spirit lingered like a soft wind, quiet but unyielding. And sometimes, on the quietest nights, when the moon hung low and the village slept beneath a blanket of stars, some claimed to see a figure walking barefoot among the trees. Her cloak shifted like smoke and shadows, her presence a reminder that though Tala had vanished from sight, her story, and her justice, wove through the hearts of the living and the dead alike. She was no longer a girl living in a shadow. She was the weaver of spirits, forever crafting truth from silence, and wrapping the world in the cloth of remembrance.